a lot of this stuff is actually pretty insane. Like I remember dealing with a few developers, and they told me stories of hackers they knew, but fundamentally different. The worst thing you'd say is our Google search engine had now changed into a AI chat interface. It's basically was Terra on some level. You don't know if it's going to go down, right? That's crypto gambling at its best, right?
Hi everybody, welcome to an episode of Not Another Fucking Podcast, because there are many podcasts out there. This is going to be very cringe, and let's see where it takes us. We've got our guest here today, Eric Gottlieb, if I said your name right.
You know me for years and you don't know my last name.
It's Gottlieb, isn't it?
It is Gottlieb, but you said you were
have I said it correctly is what I said.
You just said it correctly. Anyway, continue with your intro.
That's it. That'll do as the intro. We're going to talk about some sort of crypto stuff and see where this conversation takes us. And then, put it on the World Wide Web for everybody else to watch.
Yeah, man, don't be as shameless as you can be, Henry. If you're afraid to be ashamed,
I'm not afraid to be ashamed. Yeah, I'm not afraid to be ashamed. Well, it's true, actually. That's a great life lesson. It's like, don't worry about shame or fear. Like, for those of you that do know a bit of my background, probably don't, but you just look it up on LinkedIn and stuff. I come from an acting background, and you learn to accept shame and rejection early on and just move on, because if you let it affect you, you'll never get on in life. And I think that's great because it kind of gets you to develop. I mean, doing that, doing lots and lots of auditions, it develops you to get thick skin. So thick skin is great in this space, especially it's transferable into business. You're going to get a lot of no's before you get a yes. But anyway, I digress. We are talking about crypto.
Well, there's business in everything, my friend. Whether you're in the entertainment industry, crypto, or the magical, UN, finance world, it doesn't matter. They each have their flavor of business, and they all require a thick skin on some level.
It's true. So, Eric, tell the audience, because they will not know who you are. Just give the audience a little bit of background about who you are.
Well, I suppose, who am I? I am
the penultimate question is like, does a job define you, or does I like to go for walks? Anyway, sorry, continue.
No, you're good, my friend. Don't even apologize in your podcast. Who gives a shit?
True.
So I'm Eric Gottlieb. I am the founder or the board member of this Motomelius Initiative, a sustainability and tech nonprofit based in Switzerland. I have more or less been doing this for the last 4 years, being a serial entrepreneur, engaging the tech industry. I actually met Henry, as I engaged in my first foray in the shit pits of crypto. And that's where we became really good buddies, around 3 years ago. And so during that time, I have, moved from crypto, from previously being a dog trainer, into the broader enterprise blockchain space, then the actual SaaS space and, data storage, and then moved into fintech, where then I crossed upon my current teammates, who are in the sustainability world. And that's when we started this project called Motomelius, dealing with some of the largest banking institutions in the world, called the DFIs, the development and financial institutions, where they effectively make large-scale loans into developing countries. And there's a whole wonderful array of books about why they do this and how it's used as a national strategy for nations to impose their will on the world. So it's a fun industry to be in.
I guess,
and that's where I'm right now.
I mean, putting it somewhat topical right now, I guess that's what the USAID initiative is all about, right? Specifically coming from the US aspect rather than all the other nations you're particularly involved with.
Yeah. That's basically it. We said we go crypto, but we got moved into the magical world. I would call it super crypto because everyone says like Bitcoin has $1 trillion and market cap. Fuck, these banks have like $202 trillion of assets under management. No, these people are crazy. No, but it is USAID That is how the U.S., at least as on some level, deployed its national strategy, more or less, to impose their will on the rest of the nations. And it was quite good until it got defunded.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how true this is, and I am not someone that kind of delves into this world too much, but obviously just what you hear. But, I did hear that USAID was sort of a front for a lot of CIA operations as well, which is quite interesting. Have you heard that before?
Do I know that?
No, I'm just asking,
Wow.
have you
No,
heard of that before? Or are you secretly a CIA agent?
no, I wouldn't be. Look at my face. Like, no. So, what it can be said is that it is a pretty well-known fact that if anyone's investing foreign money into a country, you should assume that once international funds come in, well, these are nation states. Everyone can say they're playing nice, but of course they're engaging in espionage, and various other things. I say that, but truly, Henry, I'm so far removed from that. I'm from the tech side of this stuff. I'm not engaging with most of these organizations except on a superficial level. So that's where but it is a thing where a lot of the defunding that happened with it caused a lot of various issues with feeding the world, because imagine, a few $1 billion from USAID, a few $1 million in a developing country takes you way farther than it would be in a Western country.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I will say, to segue it back into crypto, a lot of the development financial institutions, or I should say the United Nations Development Program that supports these things, is engaging with blockchain and crypto now.
That's interesting. I have heard as well some of these nations have used that kind of funding to buy and build out their own treasuries with crypto, specifically Bitcoin. And I don't know how we sort of sit on that, because I guess it's good for the nation state in particular, or for these kind of developing nations to maybe build out a treasury of something that's a asset that is going to kind of combat that maybe any sort of hyperinflation they might have. But at the same time, you're kind of like, how does someone feel that they're knowing that their tax dollars, for example, are going to pay for another country's treasury, right?
So this is a thing that was recently discussed, not against in my circle, but it has been mentioned that I think by the crypto czar, about how stablecoins should be implemented into a development strategy. So one of the best, I will say this, people can say on whatever the fuck they want on LinkedIn, Henry. One of the biggest use cases for stablecoins is for individuals existing in countries without banking rails. They can get US dollars effectively, cross borders without any issue, more or less. You saw that happen in Ukraine when they had to, become refugees. The most impact that USDT had on the world was allowing the unbanked to be banked on some level and have some sort of semblance where if they need to liquidate, an asset, they could redeem it for UST or give it to other individuals who would pay them for a thing they could, eventually cash out on.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And it's one of those things, and it's a funny story with Tether and the whole crew behind that, because those gentlemen are very, very, very wealthy now as a result. But it's funny how Tether became the standard, right? Because every bull market I've heard it, like the first time I heard it, it freaked me out. But every time it's like they don't have the assets to back up what they are supposedly trading at or holding in terms of their market cap. But having said that, I remember, was it a couple of years ago, I lost money on this personally, when USDC pegged, and that was meant to be more stable, more secure than USDT, and then it depegged because of the banking crisis that happened in
Silicon Valley.
It was Silicon Valley Bank, right? Went down. And they held a lot of the dollars that were backing the USDC, and so everyone panicked. But instead of making a quick announcement or anything, USDC was always meant to be redeemable, right? You can the way it works is, unlike Tether, you can always redeem one USDC for one physical dollar. However, when that happened, it was probably like, maybe, remembering correct, I was watching it closely, maybe it was like 48 hours before they sent out a tweet specifying that everything was fine and it was all good. And as a result, obviously it depegged to like, I think it went as low as $80, 80 cents to the dollar or something like that. Crazy.
Nice arbitrage opportunity.
Yeah, well, it was, but you got to take a huge risk, right? Because yes,
you don't know if it's going to go down, right? You need, that's crypto gambling at its best, right?
It is, and that's, USDC was never meant to depeg, and it depegged. And the fact that they took so long to respond had people freaking out. I personally lost a bit of money on it as well. It's a sizable amount. And yeah, it's just I would have been better just not freaking out and just sitting on it and not doing anything. But hey, sometimes because which one was it? It was TUSD that depegged and just went to nothing, which was on... Yeah. Which one was it?
Oh, you mean a stable coin? I mean, yeah. Terra.
Terra, yeah, Terra, that was it. Yeah, Terra's USD coin, and that depegged, and it never came back up. So people were still...
Oh, I avoided that. So, because I got into... You met me 2022, like 1 month into I first got here. So I basically got into this world on February 1st. I met you sometime like, I guess it was March. And then in Tomb Fork Frenzy. And I have basically avoided Terra more or less because I was basically out and I had no funds because I was just first starting. So I know a bunch of people who had a bunch of tokens in Anchor. And they got absolutely wrecked. Some people got so depressed, and this was not like a magical insight that if you put things in unregulated banks, that could go wrong.
Yeah, but I mean, this is the argument for USDT, right? Like, now it's a bit more regulated, but it wasn't, and it hasn't been for a long time. And I mean, even now, like they are backed by U.S. treasuries, if I'm not mistaken.
USDT was weird because I think this is also where people get confused between being backed and being pegged by something, as well as like how Terra was honestly intrinsically designed, because it was based off the guy who Do Kwon made not Tomb Forks, but the precursor to that was Basis Cash.
Yeah, the
whole point of Terra is effectively allowing you to arbitrage all the time. It's not backed by really any... I mean, they basically, the liquidity got so thick they could keep it there. I mean, I don't actually know if they actually backed it because that was so early. But like, if you look back at it now, the whole goal was you could basically arbitrage between the dollar, they're like the peg dollar, which is, not really backed by anything other than it mimics and tracks the price, and then Luna, which is the reward token right? So you basically would take one of the tokens, redeem it for the other. That would increase the value, right? And then you go vice versa. So you're actually just arbitraging to keep things. It required everyone to play along. If they did, everything went just fine as things, supply increased.
Well, yeah, and then when there was a bank run and everyone freaked out, it was a death spiral, essentially.
Yeah, it made no sense. I'm a technology guy, so it makes you basically make an inherently flawed product that by all accounts should actually work if you just ignored everyone was doing, paused the entire thing, and manually readjusted all of this stuff. But let's take it for what it is. The whole industry, for the broader part at that time, and even now on some level, kind of griftery. They do a lot of things that were shady. And even back to USDT, I wouldn't call it shady, actually. There's two ways they're probably doing it. They're effectively depositing everyone's money that they're giving them into a bank account somewhere in Switzerland or the BVI, most likely the BVI. And they're getting a bunch of interest on that as banks are loaning that out.
Yeah.
So if they have like hundreds of billions of dollars, even trillion, right? There are getting so much on that interest day to day, or monthly, I should say. they can just use that to feed it back into itself. They don't actually have to worry that much.
No, not now. But I mean, it was a lot riskier earlier on, right? Like now they are such a behemoth, and they are I mean, there's no doubt about it. They are the stablecoin. USDC is trying to reposition itself, but I think unfortunately with when they depegged, and everyone's fear, I guess, was that there was going to be a bank run on Silicon Valley, which then meant they couldn't have. Let's be realistic. For any of these stable coins, if there is a legitimate bank run, none of them would stand up. They just wouldn't, because there isn't enough.
I think for USDT specifically, you'll find that it's used in Dubai. Like, I know an individual who worked as a cloud engineer or in consultant to the sheiks there. They got paid in USDT. I think it's so widely adopted. They've navigated everything so well that they're just more or less there.
Well, they're also the standard in crypto, right? Like everyone uses it for trading pairs, unless you're obviously trading BTC stuff. But like for generally, it's just trading pairs and USDT. You do have USDC trading pairs, but USDT are by far much more popular. It's not controlled by a government. Like, ironically, obviously, it is based and backed by the dollar.
It's based on,
But the US government doesn't have oversight on it, really, like they do with USDC. So, that I think in a weird way that makes it more appealing for countries like the UAE to utilize it and not being afraid to use it. It is good for the dollar, though, that it's become the standard, right? I mean, it's kind of just an evolution of where the dollar was already. I know everyone is worried about the dollar and every country is like de-dollarizing, as it were. But if the USDT is the kind of go-to stable coin, we can't have all multiple currencies. It just wouldn't work effectively. I mean, there are other currencies that they have. But the USD is the one that's kind of become the industry standard. And so if you believe in where crypto is, or even just Bitcoin, you kind of have to accept that is the one that is so far won, right? Like, I'm sure one day it'll all fall apart and it'll be very obvious to us why it all fell apart when we look back in retrospect. But
all I can conjecture on that is that one thing what can be pretty, honestly say, if you talk to people who track how funds are moved, USDT is used to launder money quite effectively.
Right? But so is the US dollar, like physical cash. Like,
no, so is ETC, and so are many others. But more my point is, it's become so widespread. There are mumblings about how, like, now mind you, the US dollar, like the surveillance SEC, or not the SEC, the NSA, like they haunt the halls of the Ethereum, the blockchain networks, looking for people to make transactions. They monitor all of this stuff, as far as I'm aware. And so USDT is as much as a good tag to find people as it is a way to effectively maneuver through the space. I won't get into all the craziness, but
let's get into the craziness. Why not? This is what we're here for.
Absolutely not.
Let's do
it. Absolutely not.
Yes.
No.
Why? Why are you being so cryptic, Eric? You told me that you weren't a CIA agent, so maybe you're NSA.
No, but I do know things that would, like, I want to basically be a successful person, and they're going to ask, why do you even know any of this? I talk to a lot of people. So, no, I mean, a lot of this stuff is actually pretty insane. Like, I remember dealing with a few developers, and they told me stories of hackers they knew, so hearsay through the grapevine, that they would go through Aztec Chain and all of these other platforms that were, more privacy preserving to actually maneuver any of this stuff. By all accounts, a lot of this stuff would be illegal. And although there is one place interesting, I forget, canton in Switzerland that does allow, it's the one place in the world, honestly, that allows for privacy preserving tech and protects the residents there. So crypto is one of those interesting things where a lot of individuals mistake what it is. In my mind, crypto is a means to gamble using blockchain and DLT in most cases. It is all blockchain and DLT is just effectively a database, a distributed database. People don't really know what they'll hear nodes, they'll hear consensus, they'll hear validation and proof of stake and proof of work. Most people don't know what that is. You have to actually be an actual cloud engineer.
Well, let's explain it. Let's explain it for everybody else here. So let's start with the simplest, right? Like proof of work versus proof of stake.
Those would be consensus and validation mechanisms. Mm-hmm. Really, basically proof of work is. So we actually get into what even transactions in just nodes are and these things. So in a database, a transaction is just updating the database. They call these ledger. Yeah. The ledger is this type of database in DLT, because it's cryptographically secure. So with Bitcoin, what would actually happen is someone would basically move money or Bitcoin, right? And it become a transaction would occur. That would basically go through a process where the validators have to do the proof of work process and then agree with each other. If they do the validation, and they have to all agree. That's really heavily, intensely, computationally intensive. Based on where all those nodes are. And nodes are, by all accounts, just the endpoints or computers or the devices running those software. There are various types of nodes, but you can just assume that these things are running software. And so they all have to agree based on the logic that's provided by the system. So in Bitcoin, over 51% has to agree, right? And so once that's everyone agrees, the proof of work happens, the state of the ledger is updated, and not rolled back, and then people move their Bitcoin. It's a very boring. It's databases. If you talk to database administrators, they're not usually blockchain folk, but that's basically what database administrators do. They update the state of their database constantly and automate the workflows.
And the difference is it's decentralized, essentially. Well,
what does decentralization even mean?
Yeah,
I'd argue it's a movement.
Well, yeah, I guess I get what you mean, because there could be data centers that are split across multiple locations, right, doing the exact same thing where they need to verify. This is, I suppose, more decentralized because it's not just by the sheer volume of users there are consistently using it, right? So it is.
There's an interesting a book called Get on the Boat. It's a technology book. Some guy from Cisco recommended it to me, and really it talked about how web decentralization actually was and what's in, like, mind you, DLTs are all cloud technology and they're shared infrastructure. So by definition, they're all centralized. If you share something, fun fact, it's shared. So it's that becomes a focal point. I think people confuse decentralization with distribution. Truly, how our society acts at the moment is decentralized. It's very fragmented. It's very siloed. It's highly specialized. I would call that, imagine Galapagos Islands. Imagine the UK.
Right.
Island people at the best. But that is actually decentralized. When you look at when people try to automate things and make things more efficient, they tend to want to centralize things for ease of access. And the thing that makes blockchain or DLT more specifically, immutable, and I guess this is kind of what they think about decentralized, they act in trustless, permissionless environments. And by trustless, everyone assumes that everyone is untrustworthy. Not that everyone can be trusted. But everything is basically about trust. You don't want trustless systems all the time. Sometimes it's just do we really need this? If not, why are we doing it? Because it has its own sorts of considerations and risks.
I mean, so that's the state of most of crypto, right? Let's be honest. People are coming up with a lot of solutions that we just don't need the answers to. We already have things that work perfectly fine, and there was no need to put that specific thing on the blockchain, right? There are some things that do, I think, have a place on the blockchain, and I think the kind of argument for Bitcoin being a store of value is a valid argument as a serious digital gold. But it only works if we all sort of agree that works, right? If we didn't agree, well, at least, well, not everybody, but enough people agree for it to exist as that, then it exists as that, right? Yeah.
It's the entrenched interests, and that's really what makes Bitcoin. It's like gold. Gold, by all accounts, should not be that worthwhile or useful. If it is useful, it's used in electronics and other devices.
Yeah, but I think I remember, and don't hold me to this because I remember hearing this statistic. Yeah, but I don't know, but I've heard a statistic or something like it was either 2 or 5% of the world's gold is what is actually utilized, whereas 95% is speculation, right? And
yeah, it's just a human quirk of human history where it became a valuable existence to so many people.
Well, it became valuable because of the nature of what it was, right? It was it didn't rot, it didn't corrode. It was a very usable store of value in some extent. So arguably, if you hold that true for gold, then surely that should be true for Bitcoin as well, because in the same sense, right, it is a strong store of value because it is sort of a digital version that is kind of distributed, not controlled by any particular government or entity, or at least not yet. You don't know how things will play out in the future, but we don't think that could happen, but you never know. And it is finite, right? Like there is only going to ever be 21 million minted, and from that, there's a huge volume of it that's kind of lost forever. So yeah.
I'm a pariah in this regard. I am, because what some of the stuff I've done regarding adjustable supply mechanisms and such.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the things in my mind with Bitcoin is that it's truly determined by the entrenched interests who got into it. Because they're, of course, they're going to be its advocates because they're so heavily invested into it. It's in their best interest to advocate for its continued usage. It's not really about. It's like kind of like gold, right? It doesn't matter if it actually has a use case or not. It's more like if it's useful to people, you can build an industry around it. That is the use case more or less. But I think that it's a rather useless, point of discussion. Is it like digital gold? I mean, it's a data. You can make anything technically digital gold.
Yeah.
The thing that this Bitcoin's by its scarcity. I don't like it as a comment because its limited supply allows for the proliferation of the backing. I say there's no backing; it's full fiduciary base. But the market makers that determine the price and the liquidity that people provide to it is what determines the price, and people keep adding to it and buying it up. So through the design that we've created for even before Bitcoin, this market maker mechanisms that we use perpetuates its continued advancement. Is Bitcoin inherently valuable? Is the market makers they make directly tied to it? No. It's just something they make. It's not like Bitcoin itself is actual digital gold. It is an effective means to make a record, a payment in something that people would buy, though. So it fulfills its duty. I will also say, I think, is Bitcoin evil? Is that a discussion to be had? I think the worst thing you could say about Bitcoin is the bastards are lazy and they won't make it more efficient. The Bitcoin Foundation, that's really it. I think you could say that, and then they got so greedy that they kind of deviated from the wanting to do good because they have money now. That's my only thing I could actually say about that. But it's got pervaded by capitalist individuals. I mean, fun fact, industries do.
Yeah, but I mean, some of the early adopters, and I don't know if Roger Ver was part of the Bitcoin Foundation. I know he's obviously a very, very early proponent of Bitcoin. But he went off, and so did Craig Wright, who was a part of the original Bitcoin team. He calls himself Satoshi. There's a lot of speculation and argument that he's not. I'm not even going to get into it. But anyway, I'm not going to get into say whether he is or he's not. I'm not. I mean, I don't think he is. But I'm just saying.
I'm so removed from it. If someone told me the story, I would have no fucking clue because it's not that
But no. But what I'm trying to say is that you were saying that they've got so wealthy. These guys, Roger Ver and Craig Wright, went off to obviously fork Bitcoin back in either 2017 or 2018. Obviously, first it was Bitcoin Cash, and then Bitcoin Cash forked again between those two split groups that became Bitcoin SV and Bitcoin Cash, because they were saying that Satoshi Nakamoto's vision for Bitcoin was that it was to be a monetary system to replace, money as we know it now. Whereas what's sort of happened is the movement behind Bitcoin has become as a store of value. But interestingly, and I guess that's why the argument for digital gold is often made, right? Because if you wanted to use it as cash, it's pretty slow, right? You can process payment faster just with anything. But if you want to transfer large sums of money, you can do it for, cents on the dollar, right? Like you could transfer the value of millions for next to nothing.
I think this also goes back into what I believe my personal thought is, that most people don't know how payment processing systems work. And they shouldn't, because most people will never learn about it.
But you do. This would be an interesting topic to talk about, actually.
Because it's all database. I mean, I think this is a lot.
Are you saying it's just all ledgers? Wait. Are you saying that these are the precursor for Bitcoin?
I'm saying they're database. But I mean, think about it, Henry. Honestly, in most technology systems, you will always have a Postgres database, an Oracle DB, whatever magical DB they come up with next. And I think this is where people truly lose it. The data is magical. It's it's tamper resistant technically. It's uncorruptible. Like, how do they know that? Why is this the case? I mean, it really is. Payment systems are database systems. They have to move through many thousands to millions of transactions and all this throughput and all this traffic congestion. You remember when Ethereum was going nuts, and you actually can do those transactions. The computation got harder and harder. I mean, this is truly all database. For payment systems, I mean, but Bitcoin is not new. What is the innovative part is the permissionless aspect that anyone can engage with it, and how it's structured and architected in the technology. It allows for reasonably tamper resistance, and although if you compromise someone's computer, you can steal their keys, so it's not like foolproof, right? And even as technology develops further, ledgers that were used in the past will be easily accessed into. And so
with quantum computers, but that's another conversation, right?
Yeah. More of my point is that Bitcoin's not impervious. And one of the other things I would say is, I think at some point when all the Bitcoin is actually made, that you will see a large tapering off of it. Because once it's all minted, you can say store of value, but even gold, as liquid as it is, fluctuates quite fast. So it will either go to something similar to that, but more in my mind, it will have a sharp decrease in value because it's just too much. And it will probably use as something, it might actually become something akin to the price of gold. I don't know where it will go because this is just too much conjecture on my part. But I do see that the moment the last Bitcoin is minted, there's definitely going to be a huge sell-off.
You think? I don't know. I think that I don't know. I think it all depends, right? Like, is the value of Bitcoin going up? And it's like comparable to what, right? Like,
it really just depends on how many people would sell off, or if they don't. If they don't, then it obviously keeps going up, right? If they do, I do imagine people will sell a lot. But that's like conjecture, because like what I said makes sense only if people start selling a lot.
Yeah.
If they don't, they're not obviously wrong.
But
it's the future arguments. Like, can we talk about the future? How this will work? I don't fucking know. I'm just making a fucking guess.
Well, I mean,
tell me.
Who knows whether, like, this is really interesting. I can't remember which book I read it in. Maybe it was like 0 to 1, where, hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago, you could predict what your future generation, your grandkids, you were a farmer, your children are probably going to be farmer, your grandkids are probably going to be farmer. So you could predict the future far ahead, right? Then fast forward to like 100 years ago, you could, you're working a certain industry, you probably your children go work in a factory as well. You could sort of predict a little bit into the future. Even like in the 90s, you could kind of see where we were going to be in like 10, 20 years time because of technology, the internet, and like, you knew that we'd be able to basically be on a screen with each other in real time, right? But as the curve goes exponentially past a certain point, we are less likely like to be able to predict what we're going to be like in 5 to 10 years time. Right now, with the onset of AI, it's crazy to think, how far LLMs have come over the last couple of years, and they've kind of hit an exponential where they're just growing, and we don't know what the future, whether robots are going to be real and stuff. And so anyway, yeah.
No, I think this is so I agree with you that we can't really make those determinations anymore. But it is interesting because we can make easier assumptions more short term because everything's advancing much more quickly. So in my mind, for at least for AI, like this, I just saved a post on LinkedIn. It was basically saying that because everything is moving to everyone, it's like Uber. They akin it to Uber, where Uber made everything really convenient for ride sharing and basically a better version of a taxi, right? And so they started out $3 per ride. It was super cheap, affordable, made a lot of sense, got an entire user base. It wouldn't cost anyone anything really. It was super efficient. Now we would look at AI going towards that model, where everything you can use ChatGPT for free on some free tire, right? And then because how much it's providing value to users, hundreds of thousands, they could probably ask for hundreds of dollars per month, 300, even 1,000 probably.
I don't think so. But here's my counter argument to that, right? And I don't want to go. We were here for crypto. I don't want to go down the AI hole too much, but it's interesting anyway. I hear what you're saying with Uber, and that's right. Basically, you monopolize the market, right? And then you jack up your prices. It's pretty standard stuff. But there are so many competing, and I know there was Lyft and Uber, but there are so many competing language models that I just don't see that that's ever going to be a case. Because if it is like ChatGPT, for example, OpenAI, sorry, that dominate the market, right? And they start jacking their prices up, people will potentially move, unless it is so far ahead of everybody else in the space that there is no even slight comparison, and it would just make your life easier. People are going to willing to throw money. Then and then that can perpetuate it, and then it's success. So it just keeps going and going. But sorry, let me just finish. So I hear what you're saying, but then there's lots of open source language models that are out there as well, right? And I feel like if that happened, that everyone would move over. People would pay for ChatGPT now already. So, but loads of people use it for free, and they know they have to give it for free because of all the competing competitors. If they didn't have the competitors, for sure, they could, but look at DeepSeek, came out of nowhere. It didn't cost them as much to develop. So they need to be able to stay ahead, still charge something. But anyway, I like the Uber example for real world.
So no, this is the thing. So my other points to that is, look at how Microsoft Office worked. At some point, they followed the same trend, but then they became a service. And so to actually say, I actually agree with your point. What would actually there's 2 points I say. The first thing I would say is, if you looked at what happened in Dubai, I think that's where it's actually going, where it becomes much more of an enterprise offering, and it's precluded from public usage. Basically, the people in Dubai now have free access to ChatGPT, subsidized by their government. I think it will become a extremely pricey tool for enterprise use cases, and I don't see it actually going down because all of these institutions require it. Because there's such a need for it, it's like water. You can charge whatever. Water is heinously overpriced. It just actually is.
I'd make the argument it's not priced high enough, but you shouldn't be pricing water high. You shouldn't be charging anyone for water.
It's a necessity. But, so now AI is becoming a necessity, but the markup on water is actually crazy because a lot of it's just gray water and recycled. And so with the thing with the AI, I see at least where it's going is that's one part where sovereign nation states, and I see things moving from venture capital actually to the sovereign funding and big tech companies funding things. And so a lot of this will be subsidized for their usage, or they will be used for nation states, and it'll be kind of precluded and excluded from public usage. But I want to say this, I do agree with you, because most people would not fundamentally want to deal with that, and so there would be an entire I won't say resistance, but like it would be open source movement, just to spite everyone.
Yeah.
Like,
And
if
like
you saw,
the beauty of something like that is that you could use ChatGPT like DeepSeek did to train it, and language models would get cheaper and cheaper. And what is interesting that maybe we'll all have our own centralized model. This is already happening on the enterprise level, right? Like these companies are developing enterprise level language models, large language model for that are contained within a company, right? Because they have sensitive data, so they can't be connected to ChatGPT outside of it. Although I mean, I feel that is rife, absolutely rife for misuse and disruption, because you know I'm pretty sure that like you'll have AIs trying to hack other AIs, and you could just leave it running, trying to do it until it got there. Anyway, we've digressed far from crypto. Let's go back to crypto. Let's reel it back in.
Yes. Oh, you do that. This is your podcast.
No, that's fine. Go on. No. Anyway, what were you going to say?
No, I mean, so other things about crypto.
Yeah. So let's go back to tomb forks. I think that's interesting because a lot of people don't know much about tomb, which was a rebasing. It was a rebasing project, wasn't it? Really, like slightly.
It was a basis cat. It was like a Terra. I mean, so
yeah. I mean, it was a Ponzi scheme. Let's call it what it was. A Ponzi scheme.
Well, Terra, it was because it was a tomb was interesting because I wasn't really involved with it. But we were involved in
a lot of forks. So tomb, I guess we have to talk about tomb before you can talk about the forks. And
yeah.
So tomb, how could we describe tomb? So it was a. It was.
Well, I guess my best description of it would be is that it's what I described with Terra, but I more or less. It's basically was Terra on some level, except they added a bonding mechanism. I say bonding, but really what it was is that you would give some of the token away for this other thing that would, give you out some more. I mean, it's basically recycling all the currencies in the ecosystem in a very inefficient way. It relied on that Terra-like arbitrage stuff more or less to happen without a stable coin.
Did it to tomb? I thought tomb was just a rebase project. Basically,
they did. I mean, it was kind of like it because it was combined basis cash with the printing of the money, right? And
yeah.
That's why it was the money printer projects, basically the seigniorage thing, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. That is money printer. I'm remembering all the gifs of like the money printer getting turned on.
Yeah, I mean, it's the rebasing. Rebasing gets a weird rap. Well, rightfully so, because of how most people used it. But all it really is just they're increasing supply automatically, which is dumb. Like basically, they did a stock split every percent, like by a small fractional percentages every fucking single few minutes. Yeah. Which is why would you do that?
That's how you had the crazy APRs, and it worked. I say it worked as Ponzinomics, right? It worked only because people kept piling in. As soon as people stopped piling in, that's when they would crumble.
Everyone had actually the same money. I mean, that's the funny part. It's not like it didn't even really distribute wealth that effectively because everyone still had the amount. If you put in $5,000, right, and then of course fees would just redistribute. But if you took those away, if you put 5,000 in, supply decrease. You still have $5,000 if there was no fees.
Yeah, but but then the value of, because you'd have to buy the tomb token, right? And the value of the token, like you would have it, you'd match the two. So you'd buy the tomb token to add for the pool. So you had the tomb, so you had tomb and you had whatever USDT.
Yeah, honestly, the pool is where the issues happen.
Yeah,
right.
And then so obviously when the value of the tomb. Well, the value of the tomb went down.
It was the impermanence loss.
You would then get tomb to replace that, but there was eventually it would go down to such a significant amount that you would lose money because and people made money. People made a lot of money. I like you. We weren't involved in the original tomb. And who was the guy that was involved in that? I remember he had a big thing around him. I've forgotten. No. Tomb fork.
Harry, yeah.
Founder, no, was it? Yeah, Harry, yeah.
He was Tomb Finance's founder, I think.
Was he? I don't know if he was Tomb Finance's founder or just he was involved. He was definitely the face of it. And I remember everyone going like, "Oh, he's the billionaire. He's backing this, blah blah blah." And I one day I might just do a whole deep dive into that.
Tomb Chain happened, and then it died. I mean, I think this is one of those things where I think people look into the past. Like, I mean, honestly, they were destined to fail because, like, Terra was an interesting case because it had such institutional backing. And mind you, we have our own arbitrage adventures, regarding this. I mean, regulatory arbitrage specifically, and try and make that work to their failure because it wasn't going to work. But what was interesting with it all is that people like arbitrage. They want to make profit very quickly in a safe manner, and that this allowed for that. Terra allowed for this, and because the liquidity was so thick to keep it at $1 or just above it, it kept printing money.
It did.
And so,
and I completely forgot the fact that they pegged the Tomb token was to $1, wasn't it? Yeah, I completely forgot about that.
Well, that's Terra, but it's the same thing. It's because it's more or less the same principles. So it's very interesting seeing that all happen. Everyone thought Terra could never go down, and by design. I mean, I'll say this: you can make any system work with enough money and enough planning. You just plot it out, and I think also a lot of the things that made it not work. Well, one was made by an individual who just honestly made it so it could be what you described as a Ponzi scheme. And I'm going back to Terra, and the other thing is that they could have put their engineering mind to use, or get a bunch of other people to make it work. If it was a normal software project, you saw it was not working out as well, or it had a lot of issues, you could just make another version of it or make some critical changes. No, that happens all the time. And you'll say, well,
you get people that just fork protocols and do their own thing. And Luna, I remember when it crashed out, I was like, I'm going to buy some for fun because they were going to do version 2, and it pumped on that. And I still, to this day, I'm still getting Luna every once in a while. It's worth nothing. And
I mean, you got a little bit of history, my friend.
Yeah.
You gotta read every fucking day. Yeah, you get some amount of money. Even if it's not nothing.
It's not zero.
You know what?
It's not zero.
People are still gambling with Terra. They're still throwing money at it.
Oh man, it's people still trading FTX token. I'm and this is the argument I have when people go about, Bitcoin's going to zero. Bitcoin will never go to zero because you'll always have these degens involved in it at some point. So no matter how low it goes, if they've got people still trading an actual, Luna,
yeah, I think this
and
is
FTX, I don't want to call them scams, but I mean, I guess Sam Bankman-Fried.
They were fraud.
No, Sam. Is it Sam Bankman-Fried? There we go. I said his name the wrong way around. But yeah, he.
Well, I don't know if that's the greatest. I mean, he's not that greatest. I want to say he was one of the greatest Ponzi Jews, but he's really not. There's many better ones than him.
Madoff to be one.
Madoff is one. A man who was originally the inspiration for a Ponzi scheme was one. There's a bunch of guys. Honestly, if I was joking around with a friend, is man, this guy's Ponzi Jew number 3. Is I mean, I don't think he's one of the biggest ones. I mean, we could go a really deep dive to see if he caused a lot of chaos.
Let's not do that. I don't want to.
How fun, right? You don't want to stir up the pot. You don't want to.
No. You would just say that Eric can say this as well because you are Jewish. I mean, if people hadn't
Gottlieb
hadn't got that from your name, but
it means God's love on some level. In that apparently we like to steal money and we'll be forgiven, but actually that's not true. Because Jews don't have that. Anyway,
Eric's going to turn into Kanye West very quickly here.
No, it's not that. I mean, joking aside, I think this is one of those things where also ignoring my jokes, of course.
I know
it is with Bitcoin. It will never go to zero. Well, I think this is where people get lost truly in it. Is that there is a problem if it decreases significantly in value. It does not really matter if it goes to zero. It is $110,000 right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not actually unreasonable to think that it would go to 30,000 again if there is a massive sell-off, at some point. because everyone can say that, but you don't truly know. People saw it at 80K and then went down to like, what was it, 20 something?
Oh, no. When it went up the last time, I think it went up to like 69-ish, maybe 70-ish.
69 and then
went down to like 16K. And prior to that, it went to 20K and then crashed back down to 3K. It happens. But it does always kind of recover, and everyone's like, you know what? The interesting thing. I don't think we've seen like absolute frenzy in the space ever, right? Like I've seen where we've kind of everyone's talking about it, but not frenzy. And you think, what frenzy am I talking about? I'm talking about like .com frenzy, right? Like there real serious bubble, extreme. Everyone wants to get in on everything. I don't think we've seen that yet. And I suspect, and I could be wrong, I'll hold my hands up and say I'm wrong in the future because it's entirely possible, that I suspect...
Fair, when you're doing your guessing, you don't have to apologize for guessing, Henry.
No, I am, but I don't want to kind of like, if anyone sees this and thinks, oh, well, I'm going to invest
Henry thought he was predicting the future for a thing he did not know would happen. Crazy bastard.
But anyway, I think that we are potentially on the precipice of like the biggest bubble that we have seen. We're going to see the influx of so much capital into the space that we're going to be shocked about where things are going to go. And
I think,
but I think that's going to be followed by a huge burst. And that's why I use the example of like the .com bubble, because I don't think the housing bubble that we had in 2008 was as big as the .com bubble crash. And I think this one is going to be megalithic in nature. Like it is going to be huge, but I think it's going to be a crazy ride up. And I don't know. People.
I will say this.
Go for it.
I became a student of history on some level. So I will say that one of the projects I was dealing with and I'm wanting to actively pursue is a thing called Sanctuary. It's basically without getting too into the weeds of the terms, a tokenized vault with stable coins so that it basically continuously accrues value and it's backed by it. So it can't really depreciate because we don't use the market maker stuff. If you're confused about that, well, I'm not going to get too into it just because it's not important. I'm not trying to sell the shit. Right now, at least. So, but in doing so, I had to learn about all these boom and bust cycles. And we're in a weird, interesting place in the United States markets, at least for crypto. One, because it's very favorable to it. But crypto has actually happened before in the past. In the United States, just prior to the Civil War, there was the U.S. free banking period. Every bank, there were many, many, many banks, relatively compared to now, but that all had their own currency, banknote. And so they all had this, and they imagined that same risk of default, same risk of chaos, same thing, people lose their homes, and it was basically like crypto without any digitization. Now, but proceeded right after all the free banking period over, was actually the end of the Civil War. And so, or was it the advent of it? I think it was actually the advent of it. So, I actually will say I'm a bad student of history if I can't remember. But what is eerie to note is that this happened with the fall of the Weimar Republic and the rise of the Third Reich as well. More like hyperinflation in that case. But you see this happen, again and again. Booms and busts. What they lead to regulatory changes. Sometimes they're useful, but in many cases, especially where it gets to hyper deregulation, it always lends itself to political turmoil or gigantic changes in status quo, for better or for worse.
Are you saying when you deregulate things, people become bad actors and take advantage of people?
Well, that is inherently subjective, Henry. Morality
True.
is inherently subjective, unfortunately, and people can justify what they like. But people, very realistically, without getting too into that philosophical side, if people are given a means to act, they will do so. If everything is cloistered and uneasy to see, there is a reason to act and get away with it. Even if with the usage of DLT and people that espouse transparency is inherently still a very opaque system. When you preserve privacy in such ways, you also give people, an opportunity to extract value through the inefficiency. So is it good or is it wrong? Is it right? Well, again, entirely subjective. Up to you, dear viewer. But society has its norms. In most cases, people will benefit, and you see that most of the individuals at the top are there because they willingly went against the grain or they broke the mold, so to speak.
So what you're trying to say is when Bitcoin goes crazy, short it.
You can do that if you can time it right. I would say it could either go one way or the other. But it does allow itself. I think this is the thing with Bitcoin I really see as a issue. Just ignoring is that there will be steep decreases in price. I think most people don't inherently understand how investing works. And because of that, well, it's not. And because of that, they're always going to be at risk for massive price decreases because institutional capital will more or less flood this and dominate the market. They are at the whims of very, very people with large amount of digital numbers, basically. Which is a very weird thing to say, is that the most powerful people in the world literally just have some shit in a fucking database. And that's the reason why
some spreadsheets. Well, it is interesting as well because now what we've seen since the last sort of like pullback to about 78k, where obviously it ran up to about 110 and ran back down. Maybe it was 108, can't remember exactly, but it was around that figure. Then ran back down to about 78, and now we've run back up quite quickly in comparison, because we floated around 80 to 90 for quite a while, and then all of a sudden just went boom. What is very interesting is a kind of measure for retail interest in Bitcoin, for example, that when we see these bull cycles when retail is like plowing into Bitcoin and Bitcoin's running up quite significantly, you see a lot of search. A good indicator is Google, right? Googling what patterns are and when retail is interested. And when we say retail, we mean retail investors. It's kind of just a short term for those that don't understand what I'm saying. That is a great indicator. But Google searches for Bitcoin at the moment are particularly like benign. They're not spiking. Which kind of indicates that potentially that retail aren't as interested in it right now as people think people that are in the space that might think they are, which inevitably means where is all this capital coming from, right? Like we already know big people have been talking about it, institutions are buying, but right now is probably the time they have seriously been buying over the last couple of months. And you can just look at the news cycles where there's nothing saying, usually when there's like a frenzy, all news cycles are like covering it, and Bitcoin, new all-time highs and stuff. When it hit its new all-time high recently, there was coverage, but there's very little coverage in comparison to what there has been in the past. So you kind of have to take a step back and look in and think like, why is that? What is the interest in doing that? And is it, we're still sort of in an accumulation phase? And the other indicator that we're probably going into a pretty good Bitcoin bull run is that Jim Craner said that there's no way that Bitcoin will hit 200K, which means 100% we will hit 200K, because the inverse Cramer is the best indicator for markets, if ever.
Maybe it's because it's crypto, it's like negative, it cancels out negative. I mean, this is why it is very weird. Well, first, I think he's just kept around as a meme.
I just love it.
Everyone, because he has his own ecosystem of people that make jokes about it. Who the fuck can get that done?
It's true. No one. It's true.
I mean, it's valuable. It's why
the inverse Kramer is a real thing. If you do the exact opposite of what he tells you to do, you will make money.
What happens when that one time it doesn't happen?
Well, it will happen one time, right? But until then, I'm sure it has happened.
So Kramer plus times crypto. I mean, I imagine these are to one negative existence times another negative existence make a positive. Yeah. So will it happen? I don't know, but it is. Yeah, and so Bitcoin's one of those weird things where I don't like getting too much on it because it is not that. I think people talk about the wrong points with Bitcoin. I think it's not some inherently moral thing. I think it's very much at the whims of typical capitalist banking, shenanigans as they usually are. People are feeding into the market makers. They're buying it up. That's mostly institutional capital. There's very few retail investors dealing with Bitcoin unless they're into the crypto scene, which is less than, honestly, than 6% of humanity at the moment. Probably 7 right now. And we see capitalism at its worst. It's used on technology that is by design shamelessly transparent. So I mean, you see how efficient it can be, and with no guardrails, you ultimately see something that's quick to die. It's a good indication of how our economies work. If there was nothing taping it together, and because like the dexes and various things that you see, also are not part of the projects, are part of the protocols themselves, and they're just kind of a remnant of what we took from the past and put it on chain. So we're very much making the same thing. So the only thing I'll say on Bitcoin, just because I deviate a little bit, is I think most of the topics we have are inherently useless. The arguments we have are stupid. It doesn't matter if Bitcoin's digital gold because it's not being used to back sovereign currency. It's not regulated. It doesn't. So it's not. It's Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin. It's just a thing that acts as a store of value for a lot of people.
But most people don't have. But do you think because it's not regulated is a USP that it can be used because it's unilaterally not regulated by any country, right?
It could be. I mean, it's like, what's stopping that from happening?
What, regulating Bitcoin? Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, okay, to the extent that you could control people owning it. Because getting access to it might be hard, but it's not ever going to be impossible, right? Unless you cut off all the internet, and then at which point you're like, eh.
Well, I don't think that's even the thing. I think what actually is going to be the thing is for the majority of people, at some point, I mean, people are in the age of AI, so they think everything's, they get trapped in, things are moving, quicker, faster. When that's really not the case, our technological advancements and amenities may be slightly better. And you could even argue on that how actually we're moving towards our power consumption rises a lot. But like, if you could say we're not fundamentally different, the worst thing you'd say is our Google search engine has now changed into a AI chat interface, with a chat bot.
I mean, that's I mean, that's literally what's going to happen. Like, I fear for Google in that respect. I think, for the first, was it last quarter, the first time their Google search and Google advertised ads plummet.
Yeah, that's the only. It's not that much of a distinct difference. Is that it just made more things efficient. But back to the Bitcoin stuff, I suppose, is that it doesn't matter that much. I think it's one of those things that becomes a talking point, but it doesn't serve any real purpose other than conversation to no end. What am I going to do with Bitcoin? The answer is probably buy it, invest into it, and if I had the money to do so, or get it as a payout for something for doing some work in crypto. If it's not that, you could probably build around an application or an actual business with it. But will it ever be controlled? I think that it will move towards people who will not want to be part of the system, just as it did in the very, very beginning, right? When it was used in the Silk Road and such as payments. And that most of the governments will want to regulate it. In 4 years' time, with if Donald Trump leaves office, I say if, but he should ideally leave. That will happen. There most likely regulation will come just because it currently is a heavily deregulated environment now. Provided the next president of the United States is the opposite of that. Since we've been having such flip-flop in my country's political system, we will see more political stability in the United States. We'll say that they're not nearly as impressively powerful or influential as they were before. It will still take time for them to decline. But now you see the regulation coming in Europe, which is not a great indication because they're always slow. But you'll see that happening in the MENA region. You'll see that's now happening in Southeast Asia. These are places where they're putting frameworks in place. Things will probably get more regulated. You can lobby as much as you want. Now, I'm making all conjecture. We'll see what actually happens. A lot of the time I'm wrong about things 4 years into the future. you know, but that's currently where things stand, man. I mean, I think it's one of those. It's a conversation to no end other than you're curious, right?
Yeah. No, for sure. Cool. Well, I think that's a nice spot to kind of end. We'll definitely have a conversation again, and we'll dive deeper into Tomb Forks. We never really got into that, but I think that's a fascinating area to maybe talk about. And yeah, thank you very much for your time, Eric. I really appreciate it. If anybody wants to find you, what are your kind of social handles and things for people to find you?
Honestly, I am not on Twitter. I'm actually, if you can just type in Eric Gottlieb
I
on
think you
LinkedIn.
mean X, not Twitter.
No shit, you're right, Henry. I always say Twitter because that was an impressive act, feats of branding right there. Despite it being completely changed, I still think it's Twitter.
Yeah.
Brand permanence, motherfucker. Anyway, if you ever want to find me, you can actually just type in Eric Gottlieb on LinkedIn. And that's really it. That's all where I exist.
Cool. Fair. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, and take care.